My boy is dying. Someone, please." Mistress Eleanor's cry tore through the pre-dawn silence of Good Hope Plantation, deep in the rolling hills of Georgia. The year was 1847, and inside the colonial manor, a boy of only 8 years old was convulsing in a delirium. His face flushed with fever, his eyes rolled back in his head. The doctors had already given up. Master Benjamin Carter, a man feared throughout the county, was on his knees beside the bed of his only heir, Thomas, utterly helpless. It was then that a firm voice echoed from the hallway. "Let me tend to him, mistress." It was Sarah, a slave woman, born on African soil, brought to America at 15, a woman of imposing stature, her skin as dark as the night, her hands calloused by labor, but with eyes that held an ancient wisdom. The master repelled her with a furious gesture. "Get out of here, you! My son is not some test for your hoodoo nonsense." But Mistress Eleanor, desperate, grabbed her husband's arm. "Benjamin, our doctors have failed. If there is even a chance." Sarah approached the bed. She placed her hands on the boy's chest and began to chant a low song in an old African tongue, a language she had carried across the ocean. Her deep voice echoed through the house like a sacred lament. Slowly, Thomas's tremors ceased. His breathing calmed. His eyes closed in a deep, peaceful sleep. The master was petrified. How had a slave woman accomplished what no doctor from Savannah had been able to do? But this is only the first of many healings that Sarah would perform at Good Hope Plantation. A story that began 3 years earlier, when she arrived at that property carrying in her womb not only a child, but secrets that would forever change the destiny of that family. The year was 1844, when Sarah first set foot on the grounds of Good Hope Plantation. She came from the St. Anthony Plantation in South Carolina, sold by her former master after the mysterious death of his newborn daughter. It was whispered through the cotton fields that the child had been born with skin lighter than was proper, sparking suspicion and scandal. To silence the rumors, the master quickly got rid of the slave woman he considered the source of his family's dishonor. Master Benjamin Carter was a man of the new cotton aristocracy. He had inherited land from his father and expanded it with an iron fist, becoming one of the largest cotton producers in the region. He had married Eleanor Mayhew, the daughter of Charleston merchants, a woman of refined education but fragile health. The couple had only one son, Thomas, born after years of trying and several losses that had left Eleanor with a weakened body and a bitter heart. The plantation housed about 150 slaves. There were the field hands, who toiled in the cotton fields under the scorching sun, the house slaves, responsible for domestic services, and the specialists in trades like blacksmithing and carpentry. The hierarchy was rigid. The overseer, Elias Vance, a free man of color, imposed discipline with the whip and the stocks. Conditions in the slave quarters were harsh: overcrowded cabins, scarce food, workdays that stretched from sunrise to sunset. Sarah was initially assigned to work in the big house kitchen, under the supervision of Aunt Rose, an elderly slave who had arrived in America as a girl and had earned the family's trust over decades of service. Rose watched the newcomer with suspicion. There was something different about this woman, a dignity that did not fully bend, a knowledge that shone through in her careful gestures as she handled herbs and spices. "Where you from, girl?" Rose asked one afternoon as they prepared supper. "From far away, Aunt Rose. A long, long way," Sarah replied, stirring the grits with precise movements. "And what you know how to do, besides cooking?" Rose insisted, sensing there was more behind that evasive answer. "I know how to care for sick folk. My mother taught me, before they brought me to this land. She was a healer in our village." Rose frowned. Healing knowledge among slaves was viewed with suspicion by the white masters, who feared both its effectiveness and the potential rebellion that such ancestral wisdom could inspire. "You best keep that to yourself, girl. The master here, he don't like no root work." But fate had other plans for Sarah. Thomas Carter had been a frail child since birth, only 5 years old when Sarah arrived at the plantation. The boy suffered from recurring fevers that sent his parents into a panic. Doctors called from Savannah diagnosed unbalanced humors, prescribing bleedings and purges that weakened the child more than they cured him. Mistress Eleanor spent sleepless nights watching over her son's restless sleep, praying endless rosaries, lighting candles for every saint. Master Benjamin, a pragmatic man accustomed to solving problems with authority and money, found himself powerless against his heir's fragility. He had summoned the best doctors in the state, even consulted a famous French doctor visiting Washington, but nothing resulted in lasting improvement. With each crisis, the boy seemed to wither away, losing weight, growing pale, with dark circles under his eyes that contrasted with his mere 5 years of age. It was during one of these crises, in the winter of 1845, that Sarah had her first contact with the boy. She was climbing the stairs of the big house, carrying a tray with chamomile tea for Mistress Eleanor, when she heard moans coming from the master bedroom. The door was ajar, and she saw the scene. Thomas thrashing in bed, delirious with a high fever, while his parents took turns applying cold compresses that seemed to have no effect. Instinctively, Sarah set the tray down in the hallway and approached. Mistress Eleanor, exhausted, didn't even notice the slave's presence. The master was in his study, arguing with the doctor about new bleedings. Sarah gently placed her hand on the child's forehead and began to murmur a prayer in her mother tongue, the same one her mother had used to cure the children of the village when the evil fever afflicted them. Thomas calmed almost immediately. His breathing, once ragged, became regular. His flushed face lost its inflamed hue. For the first time in 3 days, the boy slept deeply. Mistress Eleanor, who had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, awoke hours later to find her son in a tranquil sleep, and Sarah sitting quietly in the corner of the room, as if she had always been there. "What did you do?" Eleanor asked in a whisper, afraid to wake the child. "I only prayed, mistress. My mother taught me some prayers for fever." Sarah spoke softly, knowing that this moment could mean her salvation or her ruin. If the boy got better, she might gain the family's trust. If he got worse, she would surely be blamed for witchcraft. Master Benjamin entered the room at that moment, prepared for another night of agonizing vigil. He stopped, surprised, to see his son sleeping peacefully. "How?" "Sarah stayed here, praying for him," Mistress Eleanor explained. The master cast a suspicious glance at the slave, but said nothing. The important thing was that Thomas had improved. In the morning, the boy woke up without a fever, asked for food, and wanted to play in the garden. It was the first time in months he had shown such vitality. The doctor, called to examine the patient, attributed the improvement to his previous treatments, but Mistress Eleanor knew the truth. There was something special about that slave woman, a gift that went beyond conventional medical knowledge. From that day on, whenever Thomas fell ill, and the crises were still frequent, Mistress Eleanor would discreetly send for Sarah. The slave woman developed a care routine that combined ancestral African knowledge with careful observation of the symptoms. She prepared teas with herbs she grew in a small patch behind the quarters, applied compresses with infusions of medicinal plants, and most importantly, offered the child something that expensive remedies could not provide: constant, loving presence. Sarah sensed that Thomas's illness had deeper roots than the apparent physical symptoms. The boy was lonely, raised among serious adults, in a house where demonstrations of affection were rare. Master Benjamin, busy with the plantation's business and county politics, treated his son with a respectful distance, as if he were a small adult. Mistress Eleanor, traumatized by her previous losses and fearful of becoming too attached, vacillated between anguished overprotection and a defensive coldness. The slave woman began to tell Thomas stories during his treatments. African legends adapted so as not to arouse suspicion, tales of wise animals, magical plants, and brave heroes who overcame difficulties with kindness and intelligence. The boy, thirsty for genuine attention, absorbed every word, every gentle gesture, every lullaby, sung in a mix of English and the Yoruba words Sarah had never forgotten. Gradually, Thomas's crises became less severe and more spaced out. He gained weight, ran through the garden, and showed curiosity about the world around him. But this improvement brought unexpected consequences for Sarah. Other slaves on the plantation began to seek her out in secret, asking for help with their own ailments: back pain caused by heavy labor, wounds that wouldn't heal, fevers in children from the quarters, difficult births. Sarah could not deny help to her people. In the dead of night, after finishing her duties in the big house, she would move discreetly through the quarters, offering care. She prepared potions, applied poultices, attended births, and comforted the bereaved. Her reputation grew among the slaves, who began to see her as a kind of spiritual mother, someone who preserved knowledge and traditions that bondage tried to erase. But this activity did not go unnoticed by the overseer, Elias Vance, an ambitious man who used his position to wield power over other slaves. He saw Sarah's growing influence as a threat to his authority. He began to watch her closely, looking for evidence of practices he could report to the master as witchcraft or conspiracy. Tension was mounting at Good Hope Plantation. On one side, Sarah was solidifying her position as a respected healer, protected by Mistress Eleanor's silent gratitude and Thomas's remarkable improvement. On the other, the overseer plotted her downfall, while some of the older slaves viewed the newcomer's influence with jealousy. Master Benjamin was not a man to ignore details. He had observed that his son's improvement coincided with the more frequent presence of that slave woman in his house. He also noticed whispers in the quarters, respectful glances directed at Sarah, a subtle shift in the plantation's atmosphere. As an experienced planter, he knew that changes among the slaves could represent both benefits and threats. One afternoon in 1846, the master summoned Aunt Rose to his study. "Rose, you know this Sarah who came from South Carolina. What can you tell me about her?" The old slave, loyal to the family but also protective of her people, chose her words carefully. "She a hard worker, massa. Takes good care of the kitchen. Don't cause no trouble. But I know she's been doing other services, tending to the sick." The master watched Rose's reaction as she lowered her eyes. "She understands teas, massa, woman's things." The master pondered. On one hand, it was undeniable that Sarah's presence had benefited his family. Thomas had never been healthier. On the other, healing practices among slaves always raised fears. They could represent the preservation of African traditions that kept the cultural identity of the enslaved people alive, potentially dangerous to the established order. Even more worrying was the possibility of poisoning. Tales of masters killed by slaves, using poisonous herbs disguised as remedies, were not uncommon. He decided to investigate more closely. He ordered the overseer to discreetly observe Sarah's activities, especially her interactions with other slaves. He also asked Mistress Eleanor to be vigilant for any suspicious behavior from the slave woman while she cared for Thomas. But Mistress Eleanor found herself in a delicate position. As a mother, she saw the undeniable benefits that Sarah's care brought to her son. As a woman of the rural elite, she owed loyalty to her husband and the social conventions that viewed any manifestation of autonomous knowledge among slaves with distrust. As a devout Christian, she questioned the nature of the healing practices she witnessed. Were they gifts from God or demonic influences? The solution she found was to watch Sarah more closely during Thomas's treatments. She discovered that the slave woman did indeed pray, not only the Christian prayers that all slaves were forced to learn, but also invocations in an African language that sounded like ancestral laments. The herbs she used were familiar: chamomile, lemon balm, mint, plants that any country person knew had medicinal properties. Her gestures were gentle, maternal, devoid of any theatrics or ritual that might suggest diabolical practices. Gradually, Mistress Eleanor became convinced that she was witnessing a manifestation of divine goodness through one of the most humble creatures on her property. This interpretation was comfortable because it did not challenge her religious beliefs or her social position, but it allowed her to continue benefiting from the special care that only Sarah could offer her son. The master, however, remained vigilant. His concern intensified when he learned, through the overseer, that slaves from neighboring plantations were talking about a powerful healer at Good Hope Plantation. Sarah's reputation was beginning to spread throughout the region, attracting unwanted attention. The year 1847 brought unexpected changes to Good Hope Plantation. In March, when the cotton was ready for picking and the plantation was bustling with activity, a letter arrived from Philadelphia announcing the visit of Dr. Edward Mayhew, Mistress Eleanor's younger brother, a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. The young doctor was coming to the Georgia countryside to visit his family's properties, and as he wrote, to observe the sanitary conditions on the cotton plantations. Edward was different from the men of his time, influenced by the liberal ideals circulating in the North and by the most modern European medical theories. He quietly questioned many practices of the slaveholding society. He was not an avowed abolitionist. That would be untenable for someone of his social standing, but he believed that science could explain phenomena that common sense attributed to superstition or witchcraft. When Edward arrived at the plantation one autumn afternoon, mounted on a bay horse and wearing a dark, finely cut coat, he drew attention not only for the urban elegance that contrasted with the rural setting, but also for the curious gaze he directed at everything: the plantation's facilities, the slaves' conditions, the organization of labor. Master Benjamin received his brother-in-law with the hospitality due a family member, but with a certain reserve. Educated men from the North sometimes brought dangerous ideas about social reforms that could threaten the established order. During the welcome dinner, Edward asked questions about the plantation's management, the health of the slaves, and the methods of treating diseases among the captive population. "I have a particular interest in tropical medicine," Edward explained, carving the roasted pig. "At the university, we studied the peculiarities of diseases that affect both whites and blacks in these lands. It would be interesting to observe how you handle health issues here on the plantation." The master exchanged a discreet look with his wife. "We call doctors when necessary. For the slaves, we have home remedies. Rose, our cook, understands these things." Edward nodded. But Mistress Eleanor saw an opportunity. For years, she had kept silent about the unconventional methods that kept her son healthy. Perhaps a trained doctor could scientifically explain what she saw as a mystery. "Edward," she said cautiously, "there's a slave woman here who has remarkable knowledge about curing fevers. Perhaps you would be interested in observing her methods." Master Benjamin tensed, but did not dare contradict his wife in front of his brother-in-law. Edward showed genuine interest. "That would be fascinating. Much folk knowledge has a scientific basis that we do not yet fully understand." The next day, as if fate were conspiring, Thomas woke up with symptoms of one of his periodic crises. Not a high fever like in previous emergencies, but a general malaise, loss of appetite, and irritability that foreshadowed the development of more severe symptoms. Mistress Eleanor, without hesitation, sent for Sarah. Edward watched as the slave woman entered the room. She was an imposing woman, about 28 years old, who moved with a natural dignity. She showed no intimidation in the presence of the doctor from the city, merely greeting him respectfully and turning her attention to the child. Edward noted the immediate transformation in Thomas's posture. The boy, who had been whining moments before, calmed down as he saw Sarah approach. "What do you do when the boy gets like this?" Edward asked, with genuine scientific interest. Sarah glanced discreetly at Mistress Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. "First, I see if he has a fever, doctor. Then I make him a tea of chamomile and lemon balm. If his stomach is upset, I add mint, and I sing to him to help him sleep." Edward followed the entire process. He watched how Sarah checked the temperature by placing her hand on the child's forehead and chest, how she prepared the infusion by measuring the herbs with an intuitive yet consistent precision, how her voice modulated to a soothing tone as she sang. Most importantly, he observed Thomas's response to each stage of the treatment. "May I ask where you learned this care?" Edward inquired, genuinely curious. "My mother taught me, doctor. In our land, a woman must know how to care for a sick child." "And your mother, where did she learn?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "From her mother, doctor, and she from her mother. It is knowledge passed from mother to daughter." Edward nodded, understanding that he was witnessing ancient medicinal traditions passed down orally through generations. During his studies, he had read about indigenous and African healing practices that, although not based on formal medical science, showed remarkable empirical effectiveness. Over the next few days, Edward discreetly observed other aspects of Sarah's life on the plantation. He noticed that other slaves sought her out for minor ailments, that she cultivated a small garden of medicinal herbs behind the slave quarters, that she treated wounds with poultices made from native plants. Even more intriguing, he noted that there were fewer serious illnesses among the slaves at Good Hope Plantation compared to other properties he had visited. Edward's presence and his interest in Sarah's methods did not go unnoticed by the overseer, Elias Vance. The man saw the doctor's curiosity as an opportunity to destabilize the position of the slave woman he considered a threat to his authority. During a conversation with the master, Elias insinuated his suspicions. "Massa, that city doctor is paying too much mind to that Sarah woman. It might not be good for the order of the plantation." Master Benjamin, already worried about Sarah's growing influence, decided to act. One morning, he summoned Edward for a private conversation in his study. "Edward, I need to speak with you about this slave woman you've taken an interest in. She has knowledge that can be problematic." "Problematic how?" "Practices that could be seen as witchcraft. Too much influence over the other slaves. It's not good for discipline." Edward considered his brother-in-law's concern. As a physician, he saw potential scientific value in Sarah's knowledge. As a member of the elite, he understood the concerns about maintaining social order. "Benjamin, from a medical standpoint, she demonstrates remarkable empirical knowledge. Nothing I have witnessed suggests supernatural practices, only the intelligent use of medicinal plants and attentive patient care." "But you don't understand the slave mentality," the master insisted. "To them, someone who can heal can also curse. They can use that knowledge to poison, to stir up revolts. It's too much power in the hands of someone who should only obey." Edward fell silent, recognizing the complexity of the situation. His scientific training conflicted with the social realities of the slave economy. That night, Edward sought out Mistress Eleanor. "Eleanor, Benjamin is worried about this Sarah's influence, but as a doctor I must tell you, I have never seen Thomas so healthy. What she does, it works." Mistress Eleanor sighed deeply. "Edward, that woman has saved my son more than once. As a mother I cannot ignore that, but as a wife, I must support my husband. I don't know what to do." The accumulated tensions exploded unexpectedly. During a morning of intense work in the cotton harvest, one of the younger slaves, Benedict, suffered a serious accident. A poorly felled tree fell on his leg, causing a deep wound with profuse bleeding. The overseer, Vance, had other slaves carry the injured man to the quarters, considering the case a lost cause. Sarah was called urgently. When she arrived, she found the young man semi-conscious, losing a great deal of blood. Without hesitation, she tore her own skirt to make tourniquets, applied pressure to the bleeding points, and prepared poultices with herbs that had healing and anti-inflammatory properties. For hours, she worked to save the young man's life. Edward, upon hearing of the accident, rushed to the quarters. He arrived prepared to find a desperate situation, but instead found Sarah efficiently managing a complex medical emergency. "Doctor," she said, without looking up from the wounded man, "I need to stop the bleeding inside this wound. Do you know of any medicine?" Edward examined the wound and recognized that Sarah had done everything correctly. "Continue with the compresses. I will fetch some instruments." Together, the trained physician and the self-taught healer worked to save Benedict's life. Edward provided knowledge of anatomy and basic surgical techniques. Sarah contributed with hemostatic herbs and an intuitive understanding of trauma treatment. The operation lasted the entire afternoon, observed silently by dozens of slaves who gathered around the cabin. When they finally managed to stabilize the injured man, Edward was impressed. "Sarah, where did you learn to control a hemorrhage like that?" "My mother attended many difficult births, doctor, and during the crossing, I saw many wounded people." For the first time, Edward glimpsed the personal tragedy behind the woman's knowledge acquired not in schools, but in the harshest circumstances of human existence. The news of the rescue spread rapidly through the plantation. The slaves saw Sarah not just as a healer, but as a heroine who had risked everything to save one of their own. Master Benjamin, initially angered by the commotion, found himself in a difficult position when Edward reported what had happened. "Benjamin, that woman saved your property. Benedict is worth at least $800 on the market, and she demonstrated medical knowledge that could be useful for the entire plantation." A few days after the accident, as Edward was organizing his notes on rural medical practices, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Reverend Jeremiah, the vicar of the local chapel, an elderly and conservative man who had served the families of the region for decades. "Dr. Edward, I've come to speak about this slave woman who has been causing such a stir. There are rumors she practices pagan rituals, that she mixes Christian prayers with diabolical invocations." Edward listened respectfully to the preacher's concerns, but defended his observations. "Reverend Jeremiah, I have personally witnessed her treatments. I saw nothing that contradicts the Christian faith, only the use of medicinal plants and charitable care for the sick. But she chants in a heathen tongue, doctor, the tongue of savages. That could be demonic invocation." The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of the overseer Vance, who brought alarming news. "Master Carter, I've discovered something serious about Sarah. She is not who she says she is." Everyone turned to the overseer, who continued with malicious satisfaction. "I spoke with a friend who works at the port in Savannah. He remembers when she arrived from South Carolina. She came under a false name, running from something. And what's more, they say the master who sold her was found dead a few months later, poisoned." The silence that followed was heavy. Edward felt his stomach clench. Was it possible he had been defending a murderer? Master Benjamin clenched his fists. "If this is true, that woman is a mortal danger to my family." Reverend Jeremiah shook his head gravely. "We see how the devil disguises himself as an angel of light." That night, Edward could not sleep. As a man of science, he needed evidence before accepting such serious accusations. But as a member of that family, he could not ignore the risks to Eleanor and Thomas. He decided he had to confront Sarah directly, to find out the truth about her past before suspicion turned into inevitable persecution. The confrontation would happen the next morning, but no one imagined that Sarah already knew of the accusations. In the slave quarters, news traveled fast, and she had spent the night preparing for the most difficult moment of her life in America, the moment she would have to reveal secrets she had guarded for years, secrets that could either destroy her or, against all odds, set her free. The truth about Sarah's past is about to come to light, and what is revealed will forever change the fate of Good Hope Plantation. Will the secrets she guards confirm the darkest suspicions or reveal an even greater injustice? How will Dr. Edward react when he discovers the whole truth? And what will happen to Thomas if Sarah is taken away from the family? If you're following this story and want to know how it all resolves, subscribe to the Stories That Restore channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the end of this incredible narrative. And tell me something. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between doing what is right and doing what is safe? Share your experience in the comments. Stories of real courage are always inspiring and can help others facing similar dilemmas. Your experience might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. The dawn broke heavy over Good Hope Plantation. Sarah woke before the rooster crowed, as she always did. But this time she carried in her chest the weight of a decision that would change everything. She knew that the overseer's accusations had reached Master Benjamin's ears, and that she would soon be called to answer for crimes she had not committed. During the night, she prayed in her mother tongue to her ancestors, asking for the strength to reveal a truth she had guarded for 3 long years. When the sun had barely touched the main yard, Edward sought Sarah in the big house kitchen. "Sarah, I need to speak with you. Some questions have arisen about your past in South Carolina." She stopped stirring the grits, wiped her hands on her apron, and faced him directly. "I know what you want to talk about, Doctor. The time has come to tell the truth." Edward was surprised by her composure. "So you know about the accusations?" "Yes, sir, I do. And I also know it won't do no good to deny it. That's why I'm going to tell you who I really am." Sarah took a deep breath and began. "My real name is Josefa Maria de Conceição Rodriguez Pereira. I was born a slave at the St. Anthony Plantation in South Carolina. But my father, he was the master of the house, John Rodriguez Pereira. My mother, Louisa, was a slave from the quarters, but he took advantage of her when she was just a girl." A chill ran down Edward's spine. The surname Sarah mentioned was known. The Pereiras were a traditional family of rice planters in South Carolina. "Continue," Edward urged, sensing there was much more to be revealed. "When I was born, my father didn't officially acknowledge me, but he didn't let them treat me too harshly either. My mother taught me everything she knew about healing, because she said one day I would need to defend myself. When I turned 15, my father died of yellow fever. His son, my half-brother Joaquim, inherited everything." Sarah's voice began to tremble slightly. "Joaquim always hated me because I reminded him that his father had stooped low with a slave. When he took over the plantation, he began to persecute me." Edward listened in silence, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "Joaquim tried to sell me several times, but I always ran away and came back. So he came up with something else. He started spreading rumors that I practiced witchcraft, that I was dangerous. And when one of the overseer's daughters died of a fever, an illness I tried to cure but couldn't, he accused me of killing the girl with sorcery." The tears finally streamed down Sarah's face. "I had to flee in the middle of the night. I managed to hide on a ship coming to Georgia. That's how I got here, with a false name, pretending I came from another plantation." "And the death of your former master by poisoning?" Edward asked, needing to hear the whole truth. Sarah looked at him steadfastly. "Joaquim did die, Doctor, but not because of me. It was because of his own wickedness. He started beating the older slaves, cut the food rations in the quarters by half, did cruel things his father never did. The slaves revolted. He died in an uprising, not from poison. But it's easier to blame a runaway slave than to admit that his own people rose up against his tyranny." Edward was silent, processing everything he had heard. As a trained physician, he recognized the coherence of the narrative. As a man of the elite, he understood the social complexities involved. As a Christian, he saw in Sarah's story a profound human drama that defied the simple moral judgments of his time. That same day, Master Benjamin convened a formal meeting in the main parlor of the great house. Present were himself, Mistress Eleanor, Edward, Reverend Jeremiah, and the overseer, Vance. Sarah was brought in under guard, but she walked with dignity, showing no fear. Thomas, not understanding the gravity of the situation, ran to hug Sarah as she entered the room, but was restrained by his mother. "Sarah," the master began in a severe voice, "you are accused of serious crimes, false identity, witchcraft, and possibly murder. What do you have to say in your defense?" Sarah looked at each person present before answering. Master, I came to this plantation fleeing injustice. I never lied about my knowledge of healing. I never killed anyone, and I never practiced witchcraft. I only used the plants God created to help those who suffer. The overseer Vance interjected maliciously. But she came with a false name, Massa, and everyone knows a slave who runs once can run again, or worse, she could poison the whole family one night. Mistress Eleanor stood up, distraught. Benjamin, this woman cared for our son when all the doctors failed. How can we believe she would do us harm? Reverend Jeremiah shook his head gravely. Mistress Eleanor, the devil is cunning. He heals to gain trust, then he destroys. This woman chants in pagan tongues. She practices rituals our holy church does not recognize. Edward, who had remained silent until then, decided to intervene. Reverend Jeremiah, with all due respect, I have personally followed Sarah's treatments. From a scientific point of view, there is nothing supernatural in her methods. It is empirical knowledge about the medicinal properties of plants, passed down through oral traditions. Dr. Edward, the master said, annoyed, you are young and may be deceived. This woman is a danger to the order of this plantation and to the safety of my family. It was then that Sarah asked for permission to speak. May I say something, master? Benjamin nodded coldly. I could have left this plantation many times. I could have run when I found out people suspected me, but I stayed. Do you know why? She looked directly at Thomas, who was watching everything with wide eyes. Because this boy needed me, and because for the first time since I left Africa in my mother's womb, I found a place where I could use my knowledge to do good, not just to survive. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Papa, Thomas said in his clear little voice. Sarah isn't bad. She tells me beautiful stories and makes me feel better when I'm sick. Please, don't send her away. The boy broke free from his mother's hand and ran to Sarah, hugging her legs. I love her, Papa. She's good. The scene deeply moved everyone present. Edward saw it as confirmation of everything he had observed. The genuine bond of affection between the healer and the child, a spontaneous love that could not be faked. Mistress Eleanor brought a hand to her chest, emotional, remembering the nights Sarah had watched over her son's sleep, the times her dedication had saved the boy's life. Master Benjamin looked at his son, his wife, his brother-in-law. He saw in their faces a truth his stubbornness tried to deny. Sarah had become an essential part of their family, not by convenience or obligation, but by genuine love. Still, his authority as master of the plantation was being challenged. How could he maintain discipline if he forgave a slave accused of such serious crimes? Edward sensed his brother-in-law's dilemma and offered a solution. Benjamin, as a physician, I can officially attest that Sarah possesses valuable medical knowledge that benefits not only Thomas, but potentially everyone on this plantation. I propose that she be officially designated as the property's healer under my medical supervision. This way, her knowledge is legitimized by science, and any suspicion of witchcraft is dismissed. Reverend Jeremiah hesitated, but recognized the wisdom of the proposal. If she works under Christian and medical supervision, and if she publicly renounces any pagan practices, I accept, Sarah said immediately. I promise to use my knowledge only to heal, only to help, and always under the eyes of God and of science. Master Benjamin walked to the window, looking out over his lands, stretching to the horizon. For long minutes, he pondered. Finally, he turned to them all. It is decided. Sarah will remain on the plantation as the official healer, under the supervision of Dr. Edward. But let me be clear. Any trouble, any suspicion, and she will be removed immediately. Mistress Eleanor sighed in relief. Thomas shouted with joy and hugged Sarah even tighter. The months that followed brought profound changes to Good Hope Plantation. Sarah, now officially recognized as a healer, could work openly. Under Edward's guidance, She organized her knowledge, cataloged the medicinal plants she used, and recorded recipes and treatments. The young doctor was impressed by the sophistication of the ancestral knowledge Sarah carried. It was not superstition, but empirical science developed over generations. The overall health of the plantation improved remarkably. The diseases that once ravaged the slave quarters were brought under control. Infant mortality among the slaves dropped drastically. Work injuries were treated properly, preventing serious infections. Master Benjamin himself, initially skeptical, had to admit that his property had become more productive because his workers were healthier. Thomas grew strong and robust under Sarah's care. The fevers that had marked his childhood became rare and manageable. The boy developed a special relationship with the healer, seeing her as a second mother, someone who understood and cared for him with unconditional dedication. Mistress Eleanor, watching her son's transformation, recognized that Sarah had brought not only medical knowledge into her home, but a genuine love for human life. Edward extended his stay at the plantation, fascinated by the opportunity to study traditional medical practices. He wrote extensive reports for the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, documenting effective treatments based on ancestral African knowledge. His research would contribute to the development of tropical medicine in America, building bridges between folk wisdom and formal science. Even the overseer Vance, initially hostile, had to acknowledge the benefits of Sarah's presence. With fewer illnesses among the slaves, the work flowed better and productivity increased. Gradually, his hostility turned into reluctant respect. Years passed. Thomas grew into an educated young man, influenced by the teachings of both Sarah and Dr. Edward. Unlike other planters' sons, he developed a more humane view of slavery, understanding that knowledge and wisdom did not depend on color or social status. When he gradually took over the management of the plantation, he implemented improvements in the living conditions of the slaves, recognizing that humanity and productivity could go hand in hand. Sarah aged with dignity at Good Hope Plantation. She was never formally manumitted. The social conventions of the time did not allow for such recognition, but she lived with de facto freedom. She became a respected figure, not only on the property, but throughout the region. Neighboring planters sought her advice to treat diseases afflicting their own properties. Young doctors came to study her methods. She trained other slave women in medicinal knowledge, creating a network of healers who would preserve ancestral traditions even after her death. Most importantly, she demonstrated that human dignity cannot be bought or sold, that wisdom knows no boundaries of race or social status, that genuine love has transformative power even in the most adverse circumstances. When she finally departed this world at the age of 62, Sarah was mourned not only by the slaves in the quarters, but by the entire Carter family. Thomas, now a grown man, wept like a son who had lost his mother. Dr. Edward, who had become a renowned physician thanks to the research he began on the plantation, returned specially from Philadelphia for the funeral. Even Master Benjamin, hardened by the years but touched by the loss, publicly acknowledged, "That woman saved more lives on this plantation than any doctor I have ever known." Sarah's story is not just about an exceptional healer. It's about the courage to preserve one's cultural identity in the midst of oppression, about wisdom that withstands time and circumstance, about a love that transcends the social barriers imposed by human ignorance. It's about recognizing that true knowledge has no color or social status, that human dignity is inalienable even when society tries to deny it. How many Sarahs existed in the antebellum South? How many women and men carried ancestral knowledge, cured diseases, saved lives, and preserved cultural traditions, while being considered property under unjust laws? Their stories were largely silenced by official history, but they still echo today in folk medicine, in cultural traditions, in the ancestral wisdom that resists being forgotten. Good Hope Plantation prospered for generations, but what truly made it special was not its cotton harvest or or its material wealth. It was the lesson Sarah taught, that recognized humanity and practiced love transformed not just individuals, but entire communities. The boy she healed grew up to be a wiser, more compassionate man. The family that initially rejected her learned to value knowledge and dignity regardless of social origin. This story of Sarah, the healer of Good Hope Plantation, reminds us that even in the darkest moments of human history, there have always been courageous people who chose to heal instead of hurt, to love instead of hate, to build instead of destroy. And you, who have followed this journey to the end, now carry this story in your heart. If this narrative has touched your soul, if Sarah's courage has inspired you in any way, subscribe to the Stories That Restore channel and become part of this community that believes in the transformative power of true stories. More than a simple click, you are joining thousands of people who choose to see hope where others see only despair, who believe that every life has value, that every story deserves to be told. In the comments, tell us, what lesson did Sarah's story leave with you? Do you know someone in your life who, like her, makes a difference through their care for others? Share those stories with us. They are seeds of hope that can sprout in the hearts of those who need it most. And if you enjoyed this narrative, why not tell a friend? Good stories multiply when they are shared with love. Until our next story, and may it find you with a heart even more open to recognizing the unsung heroes who walk